let's go first to one of our Wednesday regulars. Joshua Frydenberg is the member for Kooyong, the Melbourne electorate for the Liberal Party. He joins us live now from his office. Josh, just how much light do you think will be cast on the area of the Coalition's costings in a few minutes' time?
Further costings based on the Parliamentary Budget Office, and particularly there's been some media attention this morning on the paid parental leave scheme, which we think is an important program that will help boost productivity in the workforce and female participation in the workforce. And so you'll see a bit of the detail around the amount of money that will be raised by the temporary levy on big business, as well as the money that will be saved by getting rid of the existing scheme, as well as preventing the double dipping by public servants, as they can currently do by getting the government scheme as well as what they're entitled to under their public service provisions.
Do you accept that Labor is starting to get some traction now on this idea that it's going to be very difficult for the Liberals to pay for all they are guaranteeing, for the increase in defence spending, for certainly the paid parental leave scheme and so forth?
Absolutely not. I mean, I think if you look at any of the polls, whether it's in the Fairfax papers or News Poll or elsewhere, Tim, on the issue of economic management, the Coalition is strongly ahead. And the reason why is because people trust us to balance the books. It was the other side, the current government, that said, on more than 600 occasions they would deliver a surplus and never did. It was the government that saw their budget position deteriorate by $33 billion in just 11 weeks between May and then their August statement. With us, we delivered 12 budgets and 10 of them were budget surpluses, and this government has produced deficit after deficit. So people understand that we can actually balance the books, that we want a lower taxing government, and we want to spend more money productively as opposed to the wasteful way that has been spent.
May all be true, but there is still a gap in terms of what we know between something like about $40 billion in extra costs and promises and only about $13 to $17 billion, depending on whose estimates you accept, in savings. That's a lot of money to make up, isn't it?
Well, the $17 billion is right. We've announced the savings to that amount, and more will be announced as we go forward to September the 7th. But, we have had over 200 policies costed by the Parliamentary Budget Office, Tim, and, very confident that that will be, rigorously analysed by those in the media and by those in the government, but we'll withstand that analysis, just like we've got 3 senior people who are not partisan but have had experience as the Auditor General in Queensland or the head of the Public Service in Canberra, Peter Shergold, and others, 3 senior people who are going to be verifying our costings.
Last night on the 7 Network, Prime Minister Rudd raised some questions about Tony Abbott's leadership in relation to the question of what's developing about international action on Syria and the fraught situation there. I'd like to get your comment, but first let's take a listen to Prime Minister Rudd last night.
And I sometimes question, I really do question, having known Mr Abbott for a long, long time, whether he really has the temperament for that sort of thing. Because you've got to sit back, think, calmly reflect, and then work through what the best decision is. Temperament and judgment and experience are quite important.
He doesn't have the temperament to deal with an issue like this.
He doesn't have a background in this field. And sometimes I find in him a bit of an impulsive nature, that is, rushing ahead to judgment. And you know what his background is. I mean, you've known him. He's been in Parliament for 20 years, 19 of which he was the great pugilist, And the last 12 months we've suddenly become the statesman. So the Tony Abbott that I know, having served 15 years in the Parliament with him, is of a different nature. This stuff is complex, and in diplomacy, words are bullets. Now, you just got to remember that. So on the question of temperament, I don't think it's wrong to raise the question. I don't challenge Mr Howard's temperament on those questions. Wouldn't challenge even Malcolm Turnbull's temperament on these sort of questions, because he's got a degree of background in dealing with these complex questions. But I think Mr Abbott is a little different.
too impulsive and lacks the temperament to manage foreign policy situations like the Syrian situation. Is that a fair commentary of Tony Abbott?
Absolutely not, Tim. I mean, these are very desperate comments by Kevin Rudd. It reminds me of the dying days of the Keating government. As you may remember, in 1996, Paul Keating said that Asian leaders would not deal with John Howard. Well, John Howard presided over great relations with our Indonesian partners. In fact, he dealt with 5 Indonesian presidents. He had a great relationship with Jiang Zemin in China. In fact, President Hu Jintao was the first Chinese premier to address our parliament. And right throughout the region, Australia's relationships improved under John Howard. So this is a very desperate political attack. It's nasty, it's uncalled for, it's false, it's misleading, and Kevin Rudd should retract it, because if anyone has got a case to answer for being for not being a statesman, it's Kevin Rudd himself. I mean, he notoriously, allegedly leaked a phone conversation he had with George W. Bush and said that George W. Bush didn't know what the G20 was. He allegedly said that to journalists. With China, he was briefing journalists at the Copenhagen summit and allegedly called the Chinese rat effings. And, he omitted Japan on his first major trip overseas. There are lots of examples where he didn't display statesmanlike conduct as Prime Minister first time round. And this sort of deliberate, nasty, misleading attack on Tony Abbott is something that he should be ashamed of.
Josh Frydenberg, before we let you go, the Syria situation seems, with the election campaign here, both the Prime Minister has only had limited time to give it attention, and potentially the incoming Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, has had very limited time to be concerned about it. Are you worried that Australia isn't giving this the attention it deserves?
No, I'm not, but it's a very serious issue. As you know, more than 100,000 people have lost their lives in Syria, and there's a stalemate because Assad, who comes from the minority Alawite sect of only 13% of the Syrian population, is receiving huge military and funding support and supplies from the Iranian government, as well as their proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah. And China and Russia are blocking any international action through the UN Security Council against Russia. So it is a stalemate, and people are dying. And this alleged chemical attack that has occurred is very worrying indeed, and may precipitate international action. But it's not going to be, in my view, international action that will be led by Australia. If there is international action, it will be led by the United States and maybe other partners like the United Kingdom, and France. But it's a serious situation. I know it's getting the attention of Tony Abbott and Kevin Rudd, and we just have to make sure that people do not lose their lives, as they have been, in the number that they have been in Syria to date.
Joshua Frydenberg, we're grateful for your time today.